Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom. 9 tolls or whatever they call it. So I welcome you and Nelson, 9 bells and we had Nelson has joined us and R is with us. I'm not sure who R is, but
Rosalind Platt.
Rosalind, okay. And David and the folks that are here, I thank you very much for coming on this interesting weather experience day. And I know that there was one thing I absolutely hated when I was a kid in school, which was for a teacher to give a pop quiz. So we're going to do that. Are you ready? Not to worry, because it's quiet. You can answer for yourself. And the better news is you're going to grade yourselves, okay? But just a few questions before we begin. My first question is, which prayer are we commanded to say aloud? You know, I don't want loud answers. I'm going to command you to please say it to yourself now. Just think about it. Which prayer are we commanded to say aloud?
Depends on what you mean by aloud.
There's one in every class who causes trouble. Right, He's to my left. Okay.
Because even the immediate, you're supposed to be able to hear yourself.
All right. What passage in Chumash has 2 different versions? That's question number 2. Number 3 is in Torah, there are 2 prayers only that are specifically commanded. Which are they? Only 2 prayers are specifically commanded. And the last question is, what is unusual? What is unusual about how Shema appears when it's written in a Torah scroll? What is unusual how the Shema appears when it is written in a Torah scroll?
Readers know.
We've got some people who are real proud of themselves. Okay. So which prayer is, okay, so we'll give the answers and then if anybody got a perfect score, you'll raise your hand. Which prayer is commanded to be said out loud? The Shema, correct. Which passage in Chumash has 2 different versions?
The Commandments.
Very good. Thank you, Sheila. The 10 Commandments.
There's a lot of other places.
Which 2 prayers are specifically commanded in Torah? The Shema and the Birkat Hamazon. Okay. And last, what's unusual about how the Shema appears in a Torah scroll?
2 super letters.
The Dalet is, but it's more than the Dalet. It's 2 letters.
It's the Aleph.
The Ayin. The Ayin at the end of the word Shema is larger, and the Dalet at the end of the word Echad is larger. How many people got 100%? Oh gosh. Okay. I promise you that if I would ask you again real soon, you would be an expert. So you know those things right now. So as many of you understand, today, the name of today's Parsha is Ba'et Hanan. And the translation of that means, and I pleaded. Kind of a weird sounding word, Ba'et Hanan. But you do know that root, or you should, because it's the same root as the word Tachanun, the prayer that we say almost daily, the prayers of supplication, and it's the same root. So I pleaded, or the prayers of supplication, the same idea of asking for things. And in this particular parsha, which is Deuteronomy 3:23, it begins.
This past week.
Right. I said that's why I said I was very careful to say usually. I was very careful.
I'm just saying. I thought it was
exactly. It was just this week, right? But from a grammatical point of view, they're the same root. But what this, as I said, this is and I pleaded, and this parsha has a lot of pleading in it. As you may remember, Moshe pleads with God to let him in, and you know how that turns out, to let him into the promised land. He also pleads with the children of Israel to pay attention and to follow the laws that were given on Sinai. Later on, he pleads to be worthy of the land that they're going to be given in Sinai. And he warns the people to not join and assimilate with the lands that they conquer and start practicing idolatry to the gods of the people in the lands that they conquer. Another little fun fact is this is the parsha where the cities of rescue are established. So that's the summary of these things. And I had really understanding with all of the pleading and the begging and the asking and the requesting that is done by Moshe in this parsha, it's really a very good title, Ve'et Hanan. Let's talk about the Aseret Dibrot. And I'm saying Aseret Dibrot, and already there's something to talk about because the translation for that is 10 words or 10 utterances. But what we all say in everyday language is the 10 commandments. So we've heard about this for our whole lives probably. And I'm going to ask the question to you guys that I asked myself when I decided that we were going to look at this from perhaps a new perspective, which is for you personally, have the 10 commandments really been fundamental, core to your understanding and practice of Judaism? Are they core to your practice of Judaism? Does anyone want to address that? Yes, please. Talk to me.
You know, I mean, they're critical for holding family together, an orderly community. You know, the religious concepts of graven images as an import that resonate in this parsha.
So what you're basically saying is that these are some of the fundamental core values are expressed in this concise way, if I'm understanding.
Contributions of Judaism.
Greatest contributions, okay.
Beyond.
So you rank the 10 commandments as we've got 613. So in ranking the other 603, these would be somewhere in the top.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes. And
what I was going to say is that so much of what's in the 10 commandments is so fundamental to life itself. The Noahide laws that, no, I don't really think of it as being part of Judaism. It's just second nature. I learned it so early in second nature.
Okay.
That it's just part of the way you live.
Okay. I'm sorry, I'm looking at, of course, my handout is missing. I'm going to have to get one. I don't know where.
You don't have one for yourself?
I did, but somehow it is flown away. Do you want to say something, Sheila? No? Okay. Okay, all right.
Can I say something?
Summary. Okay, fine. So let's look if
Sorry, Nelson wants to talk.
I'm sorry, I'm not gonna, okay.
So my first, I have several questions. My first question is, in the translation to the vernacular, was it in the Middle Ages, before English, was the word that was used commandment, or was it the 10 words?
Okay, the translation into what, I guess I would ask, because the first translation was the Septuagint. You know, we're going to look at a lot of translations. I wasn't there and you weren't there, but typically, I think the better form of your question, I don't have the answer to it, is when did the household usage become the 10 commandments? And I have not, in prepping this, and in quite a few years of study, I've actually never come across that question before.
King James, I think it's based on the Septuagint, but it's how they translated it.
Okay,
Because
we're
again,
gonna...
the translation of a translation.
Absolutely. I don't know how many.
I'm not sure that Latin wasn't in between.
Right, and Latin was in between, exactly.
It didn't use the Latin.
Well, the Douay is based on the Latin, which is the Roman Catholic. I, in my first life, was a linguist. Owned a consulting company dealing with cross-cultural and language issues, and have some letters after my name related. I'm very interested in language and linguistics. And one of the things is translations are human products. And there's such variety, even within the quote unquote Jewish translation. If you use the JPS versus the Eitz Chaim versus the Cook versus the whatever, it's Art Scroll, whatever, you're not going to get the same translation. It helps to refer to the Hebrew. If you know Hebrew, it is helpful to look at those roots. And even there, I find that sometimes we don't have an exact parallel word in English. You do the best you can. And translation, being a human product, is agendized. In other words, the person sees it, whoever is doing the translation or the group, doing it through their eyes and how they see the world. So it may not be the same. So translation by itself is the best we can do, but not perfect. So we have to really look at the broader idea. And also, we have the right to translate it ourselves to what is meaningful for us. Yes, Sheila, and then I'm going to go on.
Is a thing or a word. But if you put the word commandment, it has more impact. And I think that's what they were trying to do in the other.
I think the question was, when did this happen? And Nelson was saying Middle Age. I really don't know when commandment, I mean, it would obviously be, because it's not a seret mitzvot in Hebrew. It's a seret dibrot. It's a 10, and the usual translation is utterances. Okay, that's the and then the other translation in Latin we mentioned, is it Latin? Yeah, Decalogue. Decalogue, yes.
If you want to talk broadly about the impact of Torah on Western civilization, you have to look at the 15th century when the printing press came into
Right, okay.
and that was the beginning of the ability to distribute.
Yes, distribution, right, understood.
The masses, okay? Then also the Protestant Reformation had a very big impact.
I'm going to go forward with I just don't want to spend all that much time on that particular question because I'm the teacher and I'm in control today, and I'm going to tell you what I think I would like you to hear. And none of these things are unimportant, but the problem, as we all know, is there's so much. We could be here, camp out for a week. And I
just want to get at the idea that calling them commandments suggests that we all agree, not just Protestants, but different Protestants and Jews are all in agreement about these values. And we're not in agreement on this list. And it's a way of, I don't know, giving us a place at the general table rather than just at a Jewish table.
I'm going to suggest that at a Jewish table, the 10 Commandments are no more important than all of the other mitzvot that we learn. And the commandment thing, the word mitzvot is generic, and the concept that people are all in accord, that has never been true. Maybe it's an ideal or something to strive to. But let's look at some of the quote unquote laws or commandments or utterances. And if you have the handout in front of you, it begins, the side I'm looking at says the 7 Noahide laws. We're not going to spend any time on these, except to understand that there was a precursor to the Aseret Dibrot, the 7 Noahide laws. I happened to have the privilege last year of teaching, this year, in teaching Parshat Noach here in this room. And we didn't even touch on this. There's so much in that Parsha, but this is extracted from that particular Parsha. So there's some similarities in it, and I just share that with you. Those are universal laws, and they don't actually use the word commandments. The 10 Commandments that we're using right now has multiple versions, even in the Jewish quote unquote translation. But what I'd like, just for your sake, intellectually, and I'm not analyzing because I am no expert in the Douay translation, the Roman Catholic. I'm no expert in the King James, and I'm not even an expert in the Jewish version, but do understand a couple things, which they're not identical. And because of limited time, you'll notice that some of them are ordered differently. You'll notice that the Catholics have 2 covets, and the Protestants and the Jews only have 1 covet. 9 and 10 both cover covet, okay? And the beginnings are a little bit different. Thou shalt have no other God before me is number 2 in the Protestant, number 1, excuse me, number 1 in the Protestant, number 2 in the Jewish, etc., and number 1 in the Catholic. So those are little things. But 2 things I'd like you to notice. The first one is that there's a change of the speaker in all of these between the first 2 and the rest. The first 2 are God in the first person, commanding or ordering us. Okay. And then the remaining 8 are in the third person as a command form that you shall not this and you shall not that. Remember, and it's referred to God, if referred to in some of the context, is in the third person, not the first person of direct order. The one that people frequently, and some of you may be aware of this, is in the Jewish version that I feel a commitment to point out to you is number 6 versus number 6 in the Protestant version, or number 5 in the Catholic version. It's really interesting to me that this particular translation has a different word in the Catholic, because typically both the Catholic and the Protestant say, thou shalt not kill. Okay. And the Jewish one says, thou shalt not murder. And they are not the same. And it is really for me at least, a really critical difference that we understand that the 10 Commandments from that perspective are not the same instrument. Because the idea of turning the other cheek, and I fully understand that Mahatma Gandhi was not Christian, but that philosophy of don't kill under any circumstances is wrapped in the word of do not kill, turn the other cheek. In Judaism, there's a recognition that sometimes people need killing. That sometimes, and there's actually the concept of a milchama mitzvah, a commanded war, that if your people are in danger of annihilation, you need to survive, you need to kill others. Okay, I'm gonna go on, please, because I want to go to something else. If we have time at the end, I will respectfully, I will call on you. But that's just, you're welcome to study this if you wish at length and, on your own. But I just want to mention that. I also want to mention that we're not exactly sure that there actually were 10 commandments. This is all man contrived kind of thing to decide a way to make this palatable and understandable to us. There's actually a thought that, again, the more you learn, the confuser you get.
Yeah.
Okay. Because as soon as you really believe that this is the definitive mainstream opinion about something, you find out that there's another very compelling other opinion. But there is in traditional Judaism the idea that basically on the Aseret Dibrot, on the tablets themselves, there were only 10 letters, inscribed. And by the way, the idea is essentially that it's like hollow through. It's not like on chisels into the stone. It's like see-through in the stone, going all the way through letters. And those particular letters are 10. But did they represent 10 words, 10 utterances, 10 commandments, or just the beginning of a lot of different discussion? We really don't know. We need to concretize and have something to work with, and this works for us. So we're gonna go with the Aseret Dibrot, the 10 commandments. But the subtlety of God ordering the first 2, I just wanted to point out. I also wanted the subtlety of kill versus murder, because in my mind, that's kind of the biggie. Now, if we flip to the other side, we've got the Jewish versions of the 2 versions that we have in Torah. The one that comes in Parshat Shemot, in Shemot in Exodus, the book of Exodus, and the one that comes now in Dvarim. And again, these are translations, but there are in fact in the bolded area, if you have the handout, that they are consistent differences. So we know, or perhaps most of us have heard, the difference between Shamor and Zachor. Okay, Shamor and Zachor. The first one, the Zachor, comes in Exodus. Remember the Sabbath day. And if those of you need a reminder to remember Shamor, you remember Yiskor, the same word, same root, to remember, remembrance. Remember the Sabbath day. You shall perform no labor, neither you nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, your beast, nor the stranger who's in your cities. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and he rested on the 7th. So the reason you remember is to remember creation and God's resting on the 7th day. the difference is really substantive, in my opinion, in Deuteronomy, which is, does anyone remember that word? Shamor.
Yes.
You hear, we use in common usage, he's Shomer Shabbat. She's Shomeret Shabbat. Okay, the word Shomer is translated as keep. Anybody have a better translation from or another translation from the Hebrew? Guard, protect. And the concept is, what's the difference between these two things? And with respect to understanding that I'm giving you kind of partial light today, we have the difference kind of between an attitude and a mental concept, and however we go forward with that of awareness in the Zachor. And in the Shomer or the Shamor, we have the idea of you got to do something to guard it. You've got to be active in it, okay? And they are very different. 20 years ago, and I don't know if anybody's aware of this because I'm kind of like I read, obsessive Jewish stuff. And there was in the conservative movement a suggestion by a rabbi that didn't really fly, that we shouldn't really say that that most Jews are. We should invent the term Zocher Shabbat. People who are not Shomrim Shabbat, but they are not oblivious to Shabbat either, this intermediate term. I don't know, it didn't go, but it sort of explains or helps, is a useful tool, the understanding of the attitude and how perhaps you would define your own practice or your own understanding of what should particularly happen. But okay, for some, but I think JTS might disagree with you. But let's look at the reason that they're saying Shomer at the second in Deuteronomy. It says this thing about no labor, okay? But it says, and you shall remember that you were slaves in the land of Egypt, and that the Lord your God took you out from there with a strong hand and with an outstretched arm. And therefore, the Lord commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So we've got that difference. On the first one, it was to remember creation and the day of rest. And on this one, it's because you have to remember your communal history, that you were slaves and you never got rest. And now it's incumbent upon you to provide a day of rest, even for your ox and your everything that works the other 6 days. The other, on the fifth commandment, we're familiar with honor your father and your mother. The addition in this is, okay, and in order that your days be lengthened. In the Deuteronomy version, it's honor your father and your mother as the Lord your God commanded you, and that it may go well with you, in addition to your days being lengthened. We can only imagine what it may go well with you would mean, but it seems that perhaps that's a little bit more specific throughout, beyond the end of life or the lifespan, things during those days go well with you. And of course, there's a reference to having the rain and all of the things that we need that God can provide. Okay, I'm going to take two. You know what? I want to do the third one and then I'll call it. The third.
About the second one.
I will allow you, I promise you can go back. But the third major difference that I want to point out is that in Exodus, we've got, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. In the Deuteronomy version, we've got two different words that may or may not mean covet. And there's a disagreement about this, big news, a machlochet, that is not everyone's on the same page, that you shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor shall you desire your neighbor's house. And Deuteronomy presents this 10th commandment slightly different, as I just pointed out, from Exodus. And here we encounter in Deuteronomy two separate verbs, okay? Tachmod, which means, again, best we can do translate as covet. And we also saw that word in Exodus. And it also says titaveh, which kind of is better translated perhaps as crave. And the scholars take coveting as an action and craving is just an emotion. So when I heard about this, I went back, showing my age, to this Jimmy Carter thing about lusting after somebody. And and from his evangelical perspective, this was a sin to lust. And from the perspective that many Jewish scholars wrote about, in Judaism, you can't mandate whether to lust or not. It's if you act on the lusting, that's the sin. This is suggesting that there's again, a word you should know because it's big in Judaism, a machlochet, a disagreement between scholars forever about, there are some that say that even the lusting part is a sin. And there are some that say, particularly the Rambam that comes to mind in my, reasonably okay study or knowledge, is that it doesn't count unless you actually act on this, that it's not. So that's the difference on those particular things. And the discussion goes on and you can form your own decisions. Okay, now I had two people who wanted to comment briefly. Yes.
Yeah, on the honor thy father and mother, I thought that they
right, but it's not in this translation. I could have pulled another translation. Right, and we can find those. Yes.
That's an important point in Judaism that you're saying we do both.
Exactly. Did anyone else have something at this?
Do we assume these are, if you believe in different authors of the Torah?
Okay, if you believe it, I'm just trying to get volume for the.
Sorry, if you believe that there are different authors, which I do we believe these represent two different authors?
You add an if to it. If you believe in two different authors, it's two different times. Yeah, I mean, it's a possibility, right? It's four different authors.
Yeah, but
I would say that many people would say this is absolutely the case.
And then I guess my next question is, so why does this author say it this way versus this? And is it a time in history when there's been an observation that that person felt a need to say it more strongly or a different way? So I don't know. Those are the things I'm asking. Why would this author? Are they reflect? I'm not sure the time frame. Assuming Exodus was written sometime.
Totally fair, appropriate questions that, frankly, I've been asking. And most of us have been asking all of our lives. I happen to take the sneaky chicken's way out right now and say we can argue and pretend and try to hypothesize forever and ever. But having said that, what our purpose is what do we get out of it? What can we identify with? At least that's the way that I'm going with this right now. I would say one of the things is, the second one is absolutely reminding us our communal, our peoplehood, our history, the Brit, what we went through together. Okay, so that's the personal contact. Yes, I had a brief comment, please. Yes.
You're asking, Deuteronomy is also
right. It's the second exactly
of the law, summarizing of the law, and what that implies is that there's a concept called it's commentary. The texts are interpreting. It's intertextual commentary. In other words, it's changed. Our Torah unfold.
I think we all are on the same page with that. 100%. Thank you for reminding us of Deuteronomy, and that's the word meaning the second enumeration. But in terms of Judaism, the idea that this is comment and this is different people's opinions, I'm going to say that all of Torah is a starting point, and we go forward with that starting point. That's kind of a given in how Jews, as opposed to other religions, which take a literal sentence and it is absolutely embedded. It stays that way forever. Ours is totally open to a starting point for discussion of what we can take away from it. I'm going to throw at you something different, courtesy of my husband seeing we're 40 plus year Texans. Now I'm an almost 9-year Clevelander and proud of it. But he passed this on to me from the Austin American Statesman. And this is an article, and I'm not going to read you the whole thing, but I need to share it with you. That is quite recent. It's about 6 weeks, 2 months ago. And it's a professor somewhere over there. I don't have anything here. I'm sorry. No, these are, well, I can mine, but okay. Oh, wait, here. Okay. Okay, here. Okay, here. Okay, enjoy. I finished with it. I've got access. Not a problem. Happy to share, but we're moving on. So this person who wrote this in the Austin American Statesman, his name is Jonathan Kaplan, and he's a professor of Middle Eastern Studies at University of Texas in Austin. In the most recent state legislative session, legislators almost passed a bill, Senate Bill 1515, that would have required the display of the 10 Commandments in public school classrooms. It's likely to be resurrected in the next session. I hope it's not, because the bill's exclusionary character and its because of its exclusionary character and its implicit anti-Judaism. This is him speaking, okay? The bill would have mandated using an abbreviated version of the 10 Commandments drawn from the King James translation of Exodus chapter 20 and popularized in American culture in the 1956 Cecil B. DeMille film, The 10 Commandments. The version is already publicly displayed on the grounds of the Texas State Capitol. Finally, this version of the 10 Commandments is abbreviated in an implicitly anti-Judaic way. Noticeably, absent are any references to the ancient Israelites. The Israelites' experience of liberation from slavery in Egypt, he's referring to the piece that we spoke about, Because You Were Slaves. The Israelites' experience in liberation from slavery in Egypt is expunged from the first sentence of the bill's version of the 10 Commandments. All that remains is the generic statement, I am the Lord your God. Similarly, the language in the bill uses Exodus version of the Sabbath commandment. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy, and ignores Deuteronomy's version, which describes observing the Sabbath as a memorial to ancient Israel's Exodus experience. This bill generalizes the commandments as an expression of what authors perceive as universal American values, albeit important social values. In effect, it devalues the Jewish people through their omission. This legislation participates in the enduring American tradition of usurping the Jewish legacy. Reactions to the concept, right? It's happened many places, but where it happened is not
exactly the
Do
same.
you feel that his argument is reasonable?
Yeah, but it won't work.
The one thing to me that it was more glaring than what you pointed out, but the second one is in the Jewish, they have images. That's, I mean, it's completely gone from anywhere else because obviously they venerate.
Images are not prohibited in other, right?
Veneration, and it's completely against, it completely denies, you know.
Okay, so that the images thing is definitely taken out of the one that is being proposed by the Texas legislature, because again, it's the King James. But the idea, my question is this disrespecting Jews?
Catholic version.
The Protestants don't have, I don't know how many Protestant churches don't have the icons of Catholic, yeah.
They have almost nothing.
Right. Right, that what Ron was saying, if you didn't hear, is that this is a Catholic, the images are strongly a Catholic thing. They do not have images because, but I'm just asking up here. I want to know, to be honest, well, I don't want to tell you how I feel. Do you feel that he has a point? Some of you do feel he has a point?
I think so, maybe, but you know, in general, it's still a healthy thing to present, to distribute, to aspire to.
Okay, so the bigger picture is that it's a good thing. Okay. There's another argument about church versus state here too.
Yeah, that's a bigger argument.
At the beginning of the slippery slope kind of argument can be made. That's, yes. Okay, Ron, you haven't said very much.
David up there.
Okay, David, okay.
I was gonna say, if they wanna put these in the classroom, when I'm against it, put the 7 Noahide laws up instead.
That's interesting.
Start with those, forget religion.
But people don't know about the 7 Noahide laws, but that's an interesting concept. But I'm always watching the clock, perhaps more than I should be.
David and then Judy.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it. David and then Judy, and then we'll go on. Okay, David?
So I was just going to say that I'm struck by the kind of defensive posture of that article. He doesn't even talk about the church-state issue, which is the most typical way of attacking a proposed bill like that, or a proposed law like that bill. And it reminds me of when I happened to grow up at that time that I guess was far enough away from the Holocaust, but not as far away as now, that we used to talk about the difference between shtetl Jews who just took it and after the formation of the state of Israel, proud Jews who defended Judaism. I'm not sure where this falls on that. Maybe it's somewhere in between, but it seems surprisingly defensive on the one hand and doesn't talk about church state on the other. Maybe he has a context in Texas that's different than ours, so maybe that's why he takes that approach. But that's what struck me as curious.
That's a very valid argument. This was put into the Austin American Statesman, and it was not put into a Jewish periodical. So Norm, wait, I had Judy. Okay, Norm.
It's a very long article. He goes on at length, so I don't remember whether he speaks to that issue.
He doesn't.
He may well speak to that issue elsewhere in the article.
But the concept of yelling anti-Semitism actually, for me personally, turned me off in this. I think that that's a big stretch, but I don't get any vote in this. I just get an opinion, and it's worth what you pay for, kind of thing. But the other points are absolutely valid. This was kind of a new twist on it, that using a different version is disrespecting or canceling, let's use current terminology, the Jewish people. But the fact is that the 10 Commandments are not identified any longer in mainstream world as a Jewish document or a Jewish source. For it is. So,
Judy, didn't you?
Okay, Judy changed your mind. Thank you for looking at it. Okay. Shema Israel Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad. Okay, this is American Sign Language. If you're willing to, let's practice it together. Shema, okay, Yisrael, Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, Echad. Okay, one more time. This is American Sign Language. It's quite a well-known prayer for people who are deaf. But think about that first word. Here. It doesn't work. So the reality is I kind of changed it a bit for the audience to say it's Hear, O Israel, Shema. The word for listen in or hear in sign language is this. And the signers who developed this say that's inappropriate. This means pay attention. So it's pay attention, O Israel. Adonai, Eloheinu, Adonai, Echad, okay? And what we're talking about is a concept that not only for people who are hearing deficient, it's for all of us, what that word Shema really means. And we'll look at that in a sec. Yes.
Me too.
You can write to the, there are other, I mean, that is the word for Israel. I mean, that is, you know.
I hate it.
Mm-hmm.
This is from
I know nothing about that. It's for English speaking people.
American Sign Language. American Sign Language. ASL is American Sign Language. Sign language is different from different native languages. It's not a universal thing. This is American Sign Language. So this is a presumption of, quote, of English speakers. Okay, but it's broadly used in Hebrew schools. It's a thing that a lot of kids who are hearing kids, and I'm not saying adults because I'm not aware, but that children have been exposed to this particular prayer. But I like the concept, and hopefully you are on the same page that I am, that the first idea was bothersome to just literally translate. I'm sorry, they didn't deal with the Israel part, but the here part, pay attention, because that kind of speaks to all of us, I think. And when we talk about pay attention to the Shema, I'm remembering back, and I'm going to say probably like many of you, this was the first thing I learned. I'm asking you if you have childhood memories, just with a nod or so, of learning the Shema, saying the Shema, learning that it was a very pivotal, foundational part of Judaism. But did you go forward with that? A lot of people leave it. What's the message in the Shema? There's one God. You know, leaving it at the 7-year-old level and not moving forward for that. So I'd like to take, there's no way that we can go do this in a thorough way, but we can do it hopefully in a meaningful way. The fundamental idea for us saying Shema and having the Shema in our world on a twice daily basis minimally, as it is commanded, more on that later, is essentially that we are re-experiencing Sinai at that moment. Re-experiencing Sinai. And for me, the concept of, in many of those opportunities, we should be covering our eyes. That helps with the concentration of visualizing in our minds the idea of visualizing Sinai. Of course, there's a monotheism message in there. Of course. But we get that. I remember not too long ago, a parent of a middle schooler coming to me saying, my kid was asked what's Judaism about in his public school. And he said, we believe in one God. Well, how do you know? Well, the Shema says that. And that was the end of the conversation. And I'm afraid that, you know, shouldn't be the beginning of the conversation, but it is in fact the end of the conversation. It's one of the only 2 prayers that are specifically commanded in Torah. I asked you in the quiz earlier. You know now that the Birkat Hamazon is the other one that is commanded. And it's the oldest fixed prayer in Judaism. And it's recited in the morning and it's recited at night since ancient times. And there are, as you know, paragraphs, 3 passages to this particular thing. But when are you supposed to say it? When you lie down and when you rise up. So our rabbis fixed that for us by putting it in to the Ma'ariv service and into the Shachrit service. So those are the 2 times the idea that when you lie down and when you rise up. It's the opposite, obviously, in terms of the timing. But that's how the commandments to say the Shema 2 times daily is fulfilled in the liturgy, excuse me. Did someone have a comment or question? Yes, sir.
Here is a critical concept. Listening, hearing, the word Shema has multiple meanings, as you indicated. And we are a hearing, an auditory culture, as opposed to a visual culture. We cannot see God, but we can listen, we can hear. Revelation comes to hearing. At Sinai, and here in Deuteronomy, in this parsha, Moses repeats that we did not see God. We heard the words, we didn't see. So the other culture that has had a great impact on Western civilization is the Greek culture.
Okay, we're not going to go to the Greeks right now.
Just making the contrast. That was a visual contrast. Was Judaism is a hearing.
Well, I'm going to take it farther than there, because literally it absolutely does mean hear. But I told you that I have a predilection now to this after learning the sign language thing, pay attention. But there's also the concept of perceiving, understanding, knowing. To hear, I don't know, we hear things. I guess listening maybe is just the physical. No, listening requires effort, right? Listening requires effort. Hearing could happen to something that you're not intending to hear that just happens upon you. So taking it to a less literal, more meaningful, it's get this, understand this, perceive this, know this, and of course, pay attention. The other part of this that we have to look at is Ad Hashem Echad. God is one, okay, the obvious understanding of one God as opposed to many gods, monotheistic message. I have sat, and perhaps you have sat in many classes where I'm talking about what that concept of one means and wholeness and uniqueness and all those kinds of things. But I go to one of my sources that I frequently use, who is the Rambam. I think I've already mentioned him today already, who says that the reason the one is there is basically a catch-all for you to understand that we don't have words to describe God. We are limited by our human lack of abilities to perceive things. This is a word for us to take in the big picture and kind of figure it out. That might be, troublesome, but it's a nod to our inadequacy to really understand God. We can't understand God. We don't have that capacity. It's such a simple one-liner. And if we add to it the idea that it's incumbent upon us to understand and pay attention, that it's incumbent upon us to understand that we don't really know God in the sense of putting a list of attributes. We don't have that capacity. But more importantly, that is our reminder that we stood at Sinai, that's re-envisioning that every time we say that, to me is, makes the prayer kind of more than just a rote thing that Jews say. By the way, traditionally, I mentioned Ma'ariv, I mentioned Shachrit. Traditionally, when else do you say Shema? Say again? Go, bedtime Shema. And when you die. And to the deathbed. The deathbed, those I think that just seem to be worth mentioning.
It's the same as going to bed. Going to bed for life. Going to bed for life. Going to sleep forever. Exactly. Exactly.
I would ask Colleen if I'm right, but in modern Hebrew, when you really want someone to listen to you, say Shema Adonai. Shema, don't you say? You wouldn't say Takshiv. Wouldn't you say Shema?
It depends. Depends.
I hear Shema more. Like it's penetrated the culture to this is when you really want someone to pay attention to you.
But it's the same like hearing and listening. There is a distinctive difference in English as well.
Yeah.
You listen, you pay attention. So it's much more than just hearing.
And the second line of the Shema, Baruch Shem Kavod, is actually not a part of this passage from the Torah, and it doesn't actually appear anywhere in the Bible, but it's become, over time, the congregational response from the days of the temple. I love a particular midrash that says that the origin of this was actually Shema Yisrael. The word Yisrael was the other name for Yaakov, Jacob. Yeah. And the midrash states that Yaakov was very worried on his deathbed that his children were going to assimilate. And in order to reassure him as he was dying, they said, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Our God is our God one. And he said, in his words, Baruch Shem Kavod, okay, leolam va'ed, as an acknowledgement or as a punctuation or as acknowledging that he heard that message, and as he is at peace, thank God that they are going to stay with the people. I love that midrash. It's a totally different way of looking at this, but I just wanted to share it with you. So there are important symbols that are reminders of all of the things that are in the Shema in the following paragraphs. And I remind you about tefillin, and I remind you about mezuzot, and I remind you about tit. One of the things about this, the tefillin thing, is that the Hebrew word in this for tefillin, which is you place beside, the Hebrew word is used totafot. Okay, and it's the only place that it appears, and it's not clear really what that word means. The root is tet, pe, and many Christian Bibles use this word frontlets, and I can guess what it's supposed to mean, frontlets, okay? And many traditional sources just don't translate it at all. They just say tefillin. And some books say reminders. And I like that because yes, we can use the word tefillin. Yes, we can use the word tzitzit. Yes, we can use mezuzot. But the idea of reminder goes back to when you're walking on the way, when you lie down, when you rise up, all of those kinds of things. These are physical reminders. So essentially, anytime you walk into a building or into a room, you have a reminder, or you should have a reminder about we were at Sinai and what the Shema means, because the Shema, as you, I'm sure, understand, is contained within the parchment of the mezuzot. But anyway, it's complicated. There's more to that and such. And I just, oh, one other thing. We talked about the text being with the Shema being the ayin in the word Shema, the last being larger in a Torah scroll. And at the end, the word echad, the dalid, and that word spells ayin dalid is ed, which means a witness, kind of going along with what I just shared with you in terms of being at Sinai, that concept. There's another custom in some communities, which is to very definitely and intentionally say Adoshem Echad. Again, because of the similarity of how a resh looks. I'm doing a script, I'm sorry, but how backwards with, okay, a resh versus a dalet, to make sure you're not saying Adoshem Acher, which is that God is a different God, meaning he's among many, he's just ours, one of the many. Adonai Echad, again, is the one and only God. So that concept of witness, you might not have thought about before, or maybe not applied it to your thoughts when saying the Shema, but please think about adding that to your consciousness when that prayer comes along. The last one that I wanted to mention, or almost the last one I should say, is the idea of covering your eyes. Okay. Here's a little quote, Basha'a shema avir yadav al panav nikabel alav ol malchut shamayim. So this is referring to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, that he passed his hands over his face in the study hall in the middle of a study session when he was accepting the kingdom of heaven upon himself, Malchut Shamayim, accepting the on all is the yoke, the accepting of the commandments is the best way that I can put it. And his concept was that he covered his face when he, every time, to be mindful of that thing that he was reminding himself of, which was accepting Malchut Shamayim. And so this comes from the Masechet Brachot in the Babylonian Talmud, the Masechet, the tractate that is about Brachot, blessings and prayers. And it's saying that one of the commentaries on this part of the Talmud is that from this particular practice of Yehuda Hanasi, he paused in front of his students who were there with him, and he put his hands over his eyes. And maybe it was to concentrate or to focus, as I mentioned before. And he said that. And his students probably said, that's the way you do it. And the new custom began of covering your eyes when you're saying the Shema. And that became codified in the Shulchan Aruch. It became official Jewish law from that particular practice. But then there was a time when the Romans forbade the saying of the Shema. Okay, so those Jews, they're smart, they're crafty. So what they did is they hid it, they embedded it in other parts of the service as well. So it's in the Birkat HaShachar, the morning prayers, it's in the Torah service, and it's in the Musaf Kedusha. But you're not supposed to cover your eyes then, because you'd be giving away that you're saying the Shema. And you should teach them to your children. The shinantam levanecha. The shinantam is not the first word I would think of when I would say teach in Hebrew. What, does anyone know the root of that word?
Shanan.
Eshanen.
Repeatedly say.
Shinani, okay, shinayim are teeth.
Yeah.
Okay.
You should
And-
drill it into.
Right, you should drill it into, I was gonna say, you should make sure, I don't know. Use your teeth to teach it to your children. Some of the commentators basically say that you chew it up and make it digestible and teach it to them in a way that would communicate. That's kinder, it's much kinder than some of you guys here.
How about put your teeth on it?
Cut your teeth on it would be, but that's the word, Vishinantam Nivanecha, and you shall teach them to your children. But just, and then the mezuzah on the doorpost of the house, I just remind you that I had mentioned already, that it's a reminder maybe to listen to and hear or be aware of the message of the Shema, but we can take that further. Speaking to us, it's a reminder to just listen to those around us, to hear each other as well. And it can be in your lives or in my lives multiple times a day. But
Kind of look at the zod as being exhibited.
exactly.
It's just a reminder.
It's a reminder, exactly. Like the tzitzit, and the tzitzit also refer to the talit katan. And the other reminder, the tefillin. Got a lot of reminders, exactly. So what we looked at, please go ahead.
I've gotten to some arguments with my so-called messianic friends about the oneness of God. What is the distinction between echad and yachid, yachidus and so forth? And so here we have the triune concept of God, a Father, Son, and a Ghost. And a big differences in the semantics there. Would you comment on echad versus yachid?
I understand yachid is more unity, and that is very consistent with having Father, Son, and Holy Ghost, the Trinity. Thank you, I lost the word. Have you guys been on the bridge in Prague where there's this statue, this golden guy standing up there? Help me out, Norm. Some saint, and he's got a banner that says Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh in Hebrew. Have any of you seen that? Besides, you see, well, what a coincidence. The tour guide is, why is this saint guy on the, by in front of this church on this bridge in Prague doing Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh? That's the Trinity. That's proof that the Trinity, 3 times, Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh. Elliot, I'm not that smart. I don't know. I mean, we can make, and it's appropriate for us to make sense in our worlds of what these words say. I'm sorry that I'm repetitive, but I believe with all of my heart that studying Torah and knowledgeably studying Torah and choosing your sources and being respectful of others, but not necessarily buying in, is the way to study Torah. And it's an ongoing thing. That's why I'm very honored, and thank you so much. This is wonderful that you've been with me today. That's something that is a parsha that you've probably heard dozens of times in your life, that you're willing to take another look at with fresh eyes, maybe with a fresh teacher, maybe not. Some of you I've enjoyed being with before, but hopefully it's my wish that there's something in here that you will take home and that is relatable and helpful to you. So I wish you a Shabbat Shalom. And thank you.